Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Mentorship Inc. Community Healing Session. My name is Evangeline Chima, and I am the founder and executive director of Black Mentorship Inc., BMI. I am your moderator for the evening. Our focus at BMI is to build an inclusive community that allows people from diverse backgrounds to thrive by providing them access to information, skill building, and mentoring to reach their full potential. Feel empowered and be recognized in the face of a broader community. Our vision is to see a world where every Black person is empowered to reach personal and professional success in a career setting, business, and society. We thank the government of Canada for supporting this vital project and ensuring we depict the struggles and triumphs of Black, Indigenous, and minority communities while acclaiming who we are as a community. We are immensely grateful. Thank you. We cannot thrive when we are suffering. Many painful encounters we currently face are internal due to past painful experiences. The anxiety that we sometimes feel in the pit of our stomach as we embark each day, knowing that just by being who we are, we will likely meet someone who doesn't want to work with us because of the color of our skin. We cannot escape who we are, nor should we need to. We cannot change everyone's viewpoint. However, with awareness and recognition, we can consciously alter how we respond and thus begin to craft a way of living that supports striving and fullness. Today, we will share with you some thoughtful insights and perspectives about healing that would help all of us begin the steps towards achieving recovery and, most importantly, sustaining it. You're going to hear from people like you and me who have experienced and felt the same way as we do. Rejection, racism, microaggression, bullying, and just you name it. How do you respond when the pain is so much? Joining us for this critical discussion is our keynote speaker, Natasha Bowman, author, President Performance Renew, Kadon Douglas, Executive Director, BIPOC TV and Film, David Chima, a young business owner, Black Mentorship Inc. Program Assistant, my son, Nkechi Nwafo Robinson, CEO and founder of Empowered in My Skin, who will be joining us a bit later. Nonetheless, we have planned a beautiful evening for you. So I implore you to be comfortable learning from their thoughts, be ready to participate using the chat box, and please, if you have questions, use the Q&A to add your questions. Before we continue, let us acknowledge the land that we are all in. Let's acknowledge the indigenous peoples of all the lands we are on today. While we meet once again on a virtual platform, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures. Your Black Mentorship Inc., BMI, is situated upon the traditional territories of Era, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, the Mississaugas of Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Six Nations. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the lands of Anishinaabe to the Atawadandron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we are in solidarity with our indigenous brothers and sisters to honor and respect the four directions, lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors that walked before us, and all of the wonderful elements of creation that exist. Land acknowledgement is only one part of supporting indigenous communities. We hope our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand up in solidarity as we reflect and try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. It is now time for me to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Natasha Bowman. Natasha Bowman, JD, is a LinkedIn top voice for mental health, a top 30 global guru in management, a top 200 voice in leadership. She is a two-time author, TEDx speaker, Forbes contributor, media maven, and president of New York City-based leadership development firm, Performance Renew. As a social media influencer, Natasha uses her platform to tackle challenging and sensitive subjects, and she is not afraid to ruffle feathers with her commentary about creating workplaces and societies that are inclusive. After her bipolar diagnosis in 2021, Natasha has founded the Bowman Foundation for Workplace Equity and Mental Wellness, with a mission of cultivating cultures of mental wellness and psychological safety in the workplace. On a personal front, I met Natasha on LinkedIn, and even today we haven't met in person, Natasha has continued to support me anytime I reach out. And I have to let you all know, Natasha is so busy. And for me, it only takes an email and she always answers. Natasha, thank you so much. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I was going to tell you what you left out of my bio is that I'm one of your #1 fans in the work that you're doing. I've got to add that to my bio. When I see goodness in people, I can feel it, whether it's through a virtual screen or in person. And I believe that we have to depend on one another to achieve our mission. It's a collective responsibility to achieve all the things that you just stated in your introduction. So whenever I'm able to do that, I do just that. So thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me back to be a part of your network. And thank you all who showed up tonight and those of you that will be watching this in the future. Today, I want to talk about healing. And as Evangeline said, I am considered a top voice for mental health. And that wasn't something that was necessarily on my professional goal list 3 years ago. But I'll get to that in a moment. I actually want to start with a story about my dear husband, who is my #1 supporter and fan. He grew up, when you talked about the Great Lakes, he grew up on Lake Michigan in a once thriving community called Benton Harbor, Michigan. However, his family migrated from the South, from where I am in the Southern United States, and went to Michigan in search of jobs. And at first, they were thriving. It's a thriving community with many factory jobs that were available, feeder plants that were feeding into Detroit, Michigan, to the auto manufacturing plants. But as those jobs began to outsource overseas, then we saw those cities in Michigan, especially in the Black community, go downward into economic disadvantages. So going up through school, he was surrounded by people that, were invested in gangs and violence and other dangerous activities. But luckily, he grew up in a home where his father was a minister, and they instilled values in him that kept him out of trouble, barely, but kept him out of trouble. And he was able to graduate from high school, attend college, and become a teacher. When I went to the University of Arkansas for law school, he followed me there and we were married. And we thought that we were doing all the right things as Black parents at that point of two kids as he was teaching and I was attending law school. But shortly after I graduated from law school, he got a job as the only Black teacher at a very, very large high school in Arkansas. But he was not intimidated by that. In fact, he worked extra hard to make sure that he was seen for his value as a devoted educator and that he was able to serve his student population, mostly white, but he also had a lot of Hispanic students, especially from Mexico. Because they put him teaching ELA class with no training, he actually spent his own funds to go to Mexico to learn Spanish so that he could communicate better with his students. That shows how committed he was to his profession. But slowly he started to realize that his manager, which happened to be the principal of the school, was starting to treat him differently than other teachers. He would speak to the other teachers, but walk right past him. He would comment on his dress code, but not the other teachers' dresses. And this hostility increased month after month, year after year. I remember specifically having my daughter, my youngest daughter, and on that morning, as I was giving birth and it was planned, and the principal knew he was out of school that day, he received a text from his principal, not congratulating him or checking in to see how it was going, but asking why he wasn't in teacher in service. And that's when I knew that my husband was at risk. After that incident, he started to feel heart palpitations, and on a couple of times I had to rush him to the hospital. And when they would hook him up to the EKG machine, they wouldn't find anything. And eventually they told him he was suffering from panic attacks. At that time, we didn't know what that meant. We didn't know what anxiety was. We didn't know what panic attacks were. And we were like, what could be causing this? What is this? But he kept showing up. A couple years later, I became pregnant again, and I was at work at a very stressful job, and I passed out. It was at a manufacturing company, and I passed out while touring the manufacturing floor. I was rushed to the hospital, and my colleagues called my husband at his school. The principal brought up the message to my husband that I had passed out and was unconscious and was rushed to the hospital. And I got to the hospital, I found out that I had lost my baby. My husband called the principal to let him know that I would need to give birth to my now deceased child and that he wouldn't be back for a couple of days. The principal understood that, but the next day my husband received an email asking why he had not returned a student's parent's call and said only divine intervention should stop you from doing what I asked you to do. Again, that was after he had knowledge of what we were going through at that moment. My husband's mental health was so impacted by that we had to make the collective decision for him to leave that school. I thought that he would continue in education, but he was so traumatized from the experience, he could not see himself in another classroom ever again. And because of that, the United States of America lost a strong Black male teacher that we are already in very need and in shortage of. That was our first brush with mental health and how the workplace can impact it. My husband never healed from that. In fact, he still here all of these years later, 15 years later, talks about that on a daily basis. And that has what inspired my work to do what I'm doing. I never knew that so many years later after the COVID pandemic, actually during the COVID pandemic, that I would have actually had my own mental health crisis. You see, when everything shut down, when all the businesses shut down, my clients canceled projects, I didn't know who I was without the value of my profession. because I didn't see myself the value in me as an individual, because society has placed so much pressure, especially on Black women, to put emphasis on their career, to be the most educated, to work harder, achieve harder. So I put everything into that so that when it was taken away from me due to the COVID pandemic, I didn't know what to do. And I entered a mental health crisis that resulted in a suicide attempt, and that resulted in an inpatient hospitalization in a mental health facility for 10 days. But when I came out of that and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I had two paths I could take, now being diagnosed as mentally ill. I could go down the path that some take where they don't accept that, where they refuse treatment, and that leads to more dangerous behavior and are not able to move on with their lives. Or I could take the path of accepting my condition, getting the treatment that I needed, and trying to turn my pain into purpose. And that's exactly what I did. I decided to heal from the trauma that my husband's workplace put him through, from the past traumas that some of my workplaces had put me through, and from the trauma of my own lived experience with being diagnosed with a mental illness. And I encourage you to do the same. We all are suffering from some sort of trauma in our lives. And as Black professionals, a lot of it is workplace related. Oftentimes, no matter how much value we bring to our workplaces, we are still not respected. We're still not recognized. We're still not compensated. And we're not seen like it doesn't seem like we matter. And that's where the concept of Black Lives Matter intersects with the workplace. And people ask me all the time, why do we say that at work? Because things that are happening outside of the workplace, they directly impact how we work and people's perception of us. However, it is time for us to take our value back. It is time for us to heal from the trauma that workplaces have put upon us. And this is how we can do it. Number one, don't make the mistake that I have made, that I've realized now after my own mental health crisis, of giving everything you have to your careers, because sometimes that feels like that's all that we're worth, right? We have to embrace who we are as Black human beings and embrace and be excited and appreciate our history, appreciate the value that we've already contributed to our respective countries and the value that we can contribute. That's our first thing. Our second thing is to create boundaries as it relates to our professional and our personal lives. I realized as I have been healing from workplace trauma, childhood trauma that I didn't even realize I had until I started to unpack during my mental health crisis, that I had not set boundaries for family members, from professionals, and therefore I wasn't taking care of me. We need to give ourselves permission to take care of us. We also need to be able to say when we are not okay. As a Black people, we have a habit of thinking that we have to be strong. If I hear the phrase strong Black woman again, I'll probably scream, because that sets this unrealistic expectation. You don't have to be a strong Black woman. You don't have to be a strong Black man every day. Just be your best self every day. As long as you're meeting your expectations. And sometimes you may not, and that's okay. We have struggled too long thinking that we've got to wake up every single day and exceed every goal, check every goal off of our list. We don't have to do that. Be okay with not being okay. Get treatment, seek help. Those are things that are not normalized in the Black community. But I beg of you today, in order to recover from our place of trauma, in order to heal and move forward, because we can't be our best selves, right, unless we're taking care of ourselves mentally and physically. And when we decide to do that, the imagination is balanced of what we can accomplish as a people, right? So I challenge you of that today, those three things: to heal, to move forward, to get over not get over, but to move past, because you'll never get over. It'll always be part of your history. But as they say, what doesn't break you does make you stronger. And I am living proof of that today. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, Natasha, thank you so much. Every time I hear your story, my heart skips. And I'm so, so sorry once again that you and your husband had to go through that. It reminds me of my own trauma.
Yes.
And you're so right. Almost every trauma hurt that we go through is related somehow with work.
Right.
With work. And I know that most questions that our participants have in their mind is how can I move forward? How can I get this healing jump started? And that's one of the things that we are going to be discussing tonight.
Yes.
So thank you for that powerful speech and opening. Let's go into our panel discussion, and I'm going to ask all of the panelists to please take 1 minute or two, not more than that, because I see the time is running, to introduce yourself. And in no order, if I may start with you, Kadun, if you can please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kaitlyn Douglas, Executive Director at BIPOC TV and Film. I'm from the Caribbean, Grenada to be exact. I've lived in Canada for more than half of my life, so this is home for me as well. I'm so happy to be here today to talk about this really important conversation about what healing work we need to do so we can move forward. So looking forward to having a great chat with everyone.
Oh, okay, I'm on mute. Thank you so much. That was really brave. Thank you, Kadun. I can't wait to hear you impact us. David.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Chima. I am the program assistant for BMI, and I'm currently in my last year at Toronto Metropolitan, or formerly known as Ryerson University. I am an artist, and I'm also an inspiring lawyer. And to get into the business field, I'm a young entrepreneur. I'm all that. So I'm so glad to be speaking to all of you today. And I can't wait to get into the discussion.
You left out the most important part. You're my son.
And I'm your son, yes.
Okay, I think Kechi is having challenges to log in. I don't know if she's in. I've been on the phone with her, trying to support her to log in. So let's see if she is able to come in. But while we're waiting for Nkechi to come in and introduce herself, I think we will start with the questions that we have. And just to remind everybody, if you have any question, please do put it in the Q&A. We want everybody to participate. Let us know where you're logging in, where you're joining us from today. Oh, here she comes. Yeah. But yes, let us know where you are joining us from today. We would like to know. You can put that in the chat. We really want this to be as interactive as possible. So be part of this. So go ahead and put in your question in the Q&A and however you are feeling in the chat. Nkechi, welcome. So we are really just doing the introduction. So I'm going to give you 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourself briefly. Thank you. You are on mute. You're on mute. And Max, I think David is still, I think David is still pinned to the screen, but go ahead and catch it.
I said, there's nothing like coming in to having to be ready right off the gate. So my name is Nkechi Nwafọ-Robinson. I like to start with what I'm made for. And so I truly believe that everything I stand for is really to fulfill a mission I have, which is to help 1 billion people in this world think in ways that are empowering. And so always very excited to be invited to such platforms to share energy with other great thought leaders on, significant topics that can help empower people. And so anyone that's here listening, my ask for you is to leave here different. You know, if you're actually going to be the same person walking out of here, I'm just going to say you're wasting your time. I know I'm certainly going to leave here feeling enriched and empowered and elevated and straightened up and make this time worth it. So thank you very much, Evangeline, for inviting me to share energy here. And then what I'm paid for today, which is a very interesting day to ask me this because I am transitioning. I work at TD Bank. For those of you that don't know, 8th largest bank in assets in North America. I'm in technology, and so I often say that I work for a bank, but I know nothing about banking. And I'm in technology. I've always been in technology. My dad, you know, shout out to my dad, Papa, who died about, he left me about 192 days ago now, you know, but yeah, he instilled tech in me from a really, really young age. And I just followed that, you know, the seeds. And so I currently have done a number of different things, anywhere from running a data center for Rogers Telecom, Rogers Communication, one of our largest telecom companies in the country, to global delivery over at IBM, to doing large technology enterprise initiatives over at TD, and currently part of a transformational experience where we're transforming the way that we work. So introducing new ways of working across the entire bank. So from, you know, top of the house, right down to the actual important people that actually get to do the work, and thriving, loving the experience. I'm very grateful for it. So that's what I'm paid for.
Thank you so much, Nkechi, for that. And thank you all panelists for taking the time to be here today for this critical discussion that we're going to have about healing. So Kadum, I'm going to actually start with you today. My first question for you. Oftentimes, a lot of us Black professionals, especially since the pandemic, what we see happening is a lot of Black professionals are being hired, being accepted into the organizational board, and all of us that have those experiences say that though we are hired to lead, that they still struggle to make their voices heard. Max, I think Kechi is still being pinned to the screen. But anyways, Kadum, the question for you here is, why aren't Black professionals given the autonomy that they need to lead? Why does there continue to be a gap?
Yeah, I'm glad that we started off with this one. It's something that I've really paid attention to over the past few years, and also thinking about within our industry. So I work in the film and television sector. And what I've noticed is that, yes, we're hired in those roles, but a lot of times we're not hired specifically for our skills, for our experience, but for the optics. And when organizations hire us as tokens, this is what we end up seeing in the end, that we're put in these roles, they take all the pictures, but we're not empowered within the space. A lot of times, and I want, especially for DEI roles, DEI departments are often underfunded, under-resourced. I know several leaders, Black leaders, leaders of color, who are in roles like this in organizations, but some of them have no staff. They have a very tiny budget to work with. There's a lot of pushback that they're getting from leadership, from their colleagues, as well as, and also including people who may report up into them. So there's one thing in terms of hiring us because it looks good, but another part in terms of giving us the tools, the resources, the access that we need to truly succeed in our roles. So that's the biggest part that I've seen. And another part is just seeing that there is a very implicit and explicit bias against us in terms of our capabilities. There's always a conversation me and my colleagues have a lot is, when does our training end? When do we stop becoming emerging? And that's when I say we're stuck in, because we're never believed as fully being capable of carrying a role, but as someone else's that's someone else's bias, that's being placed upon us at that time. So we really have to look at one in terms of, even if someone is hired, do they have the staff resource, the funding? Do they have full buy-in from leadership as well, from their colleagues? Are they on board for part of that? When we are isolated in these spaces, that's what causes a lot of harm. So many times I've been sometimes the only person of color in a room, many times the only Black woman in a room. And what that does, that slow erosion of the spirit, that can occur from that, especially when you're getting a lot of pushback from the people who you're working with about it, and a lot of gaslighting may take place as well. But then the next part is just people's biases, the racism that exists within our institutions as well, saying about like, what are we actually capable of? I also want to speak about this other part which is something that's repeated a lot within our communities, that we have to work twice as hard. And I'm like, even with that, the weight of it, that we have to do this additional work, we have to put out so much more, we have to also suffer more, to see any form of reward. And I actively try to resist that, I've seen so many people who, especially people who are white, people who are privileged, having the opportunity to fail. And I think that's what I want us to have. I want us to have the opportunity to fail, to learn from our failures, where we don't have to have everything, we don't have to meet everything to gain a certain position or to work at a company, that people could see us for our potential, but also for what we've been able to do so far. So that would be like my very long answer to your question.
Well, that's actually very good. It was interesting when you talked about when are we still in learning? When is the learning going to be over?
Yeah.
When are we going to be given the space, to actually be the leader that we've been hired to be? I had someone recently shared with me their experience on being on an all whiteboard, where though the organization really have good intentions of bringing in diversity, creating an inclusive environment, but yet they didn't know how to allow this individual that they have brought in to bring in her or his own expertise to the table.
Yeah. I also want to speak about the language of letting and allowing and so on. I go back to something that Ava DuVernay said, in terms of, we were always asking for permission, always asking for that, to be for a seat at the table, for someone to give us the green light for something. And if we look at most revolutions, or when change has really happened, is because it was taken. And that people had to step in boldly and also to assert yourself, I cannot sit by and also just wait for people to do that, because it will never happen. I will never be enough. I will never be enough for them, so a lot of it is also doing that work too, and also knowing internally, that it's to take up that space, to know that, okay, I am in this role. I've been hired in for you to just be dominant in it as well. And that's another part in terms of what we need to work on. And that takes a lot of work. I often tell people I still struggle a lot with my confidence, but there's some things that I'm very clear on, that I know that I'm amazing at, and I've also walked into interviews being like, they will be very dumb not to hire me. I am the best person for this role. I know it. I know I got it right here. And to have that kind of self-talk as well. So there's the conversations that we have internally and the language that we use. And I feel like we use a lot of permissive language. And we know what that's rooted in as well. It's rooted in a lot of the trauma that we experience, a lot of the violence that we experience in many ways, just being Black in this world. But there are some shifts that we could make as well, to be like, this is who I am, and but it takes a lot of work to get there. I'm not telling people who are just starting out in their careers to do that, to do that stuff. But
absolutely,
there are some of us who have that power within ourselves already. We just need to tap into it.
And it's also interesting because we were taught by our parents, to be careful. We were taught to behave in a certain way and act in a certain way, which really brings me to David, because what ends up happening is that we pass trauma, down to the next generation. And we find that this kind of contributes to our children, the next generation, questioning themselves and not stepping up to like you say, to own this space. So David, have you experienced this stress because of the generational impact of racism?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, I think it's kind of much more complicated than that, because when you talk about passing down trauma and racism down to your children, it's kind of funny because it's most of the time it's done out of good intent of parents wanting to protect their kids. So they want to equip them with the information in order for them to navigate throughout the world and be wary of the threats that may come to them. But sometimes it comes across as now that kid is one questioning himself, as in where does he fit in all of this? And now he becomes more wary in his interactions, and it makes him more timid in how he interacts with the world. And that's something that I've come to experience in just kind of my everyday life, especially at school, because I've had racist experiences at school, of course. And it makes you question yourself, and it makes you kind of careful. It makes you second guess things that could just be minor inconvenience to being a personal attack on yourself.
And I know, David, before we even started this, I see you asked me when I said, oh, David, this is what, we probably talk about. And you said to me, well, Mom, if I have to be honest, it's going to involve you. And I said, yes, feel free, talk to me, talk to us, because I'm hoping that you're going to help me learn, and you're going to help other parents that are logged in here today to learn. So would you be able to give us examples of how these generational trauma that most of us carry have impacted you? Just give me an example of one thing, for example.
Of how generational trauma has impacted me?
Or example of what we've done, what I have done, or daddy or uncle or auntie or whoever has done.
I think one of the biggest kind of impacts kind of comes unwittingly from you, and because I know you've experienced many traumatic experience when it comes to you and your workplace. And anytime you would talk about these stories to us, you would always almost kind of separated between, these white people don't understand us. They don't value me and things like that. And once I started to pick up on that, it made me more wary when I'm dealing with white adults, whether it be in the workplace or whether it be at school. It makes me more wary because I feel like they are looking down on me in a sense. And I've kind of taken those experiences from you, and it kind of makes me more careful and more nervous and more timid. And it makes me not want to fully express myself, because I don't want to step on somebody's toes, because through some of your stories, sadly, it's shown that if you're too, for lack of a better word, confident in yourself, that you may be a target. So it makes me want to step back a little bit to avoid that. So that would be an example.
Interesting. And part of what I'm hoping that we're going to do today is learn how we can interact with our younger generation, while we are hoping to protect them. We also try as much as we can to allow them to experience life for themselves. So Nkechi, I'm going to come to you. Recently, a friend of mine shared with me that their boss wanted them to provide tips on how to ensure inclusion is achieved in their training. Mind you, this person is not a DEI expert. Is there an undue burden on people of color to manage experiences of racism for others?
So I can only speak from my experience. But I would assume that, you know, as I share my experience with others, there's a lot of head nods. And if anyone in the chat can appreciate any of this, you know, maybe just put in an emoji like an amen, like, you know, or something. So I would say that there was a flurry. Let me just go back to George Floyd. Okay. So George Floyd exploded around the world, to be quite honest. Within my realm, in my experience, in my environment, I suddenly became the spokesperson, like the person that now needed to help teams around the organization understand how to better relations or how to better understanding of the Black experience, or what is the Black experience, or how can we help? And I laugh because I would say that at the onset, at first, it was like, okay, yeah, sure, let's go. And then it became quite exhausting. And so, you know, at my level, being an executive, there's not a lot of us. In fact, not many. And I often pride myself, and Kanan, I could definitely appreciate you. I actually go where I don't see me. And the reason I do that, because I believe that I am purposed to blaze the trails and open up the doors wide so that others can come up behind me, because we still need people who are willing and brave enough to do that. But the challenge that presents then is that I'm oftentimes the only person at that level that can start to speak and help people understand experiences. So there's a Black tax, certainly, to that. But then after I just decided to flip the switch, and maybe not everyone can do it, but I just decided, I said, you just implemented a $300 million project. You tell me, like, you're pretty, like, you're actually pretty smart. Tell me, like, if you had no fear that you would offend me, what would you say? Because that's really what the barrier is. You think that you're going to offend me, but you know what? There's no growth where we do not get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem has to come out of your mouth. It has to come out of your thoughts. You have to push it out so that either you can open yourself up to receiving other perspectives, or B, you can actually hear, you know, what has been ingrained in you from your problems, right? And then the other thing I would say is, I stopped talking so much because I want to start listening. And one of the things that I want to listen for is how many organizations are really doing the work to understand root cause. Like, when we think about, especially Black people that work in big organizations that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Like, or let's just say 50 plus years, right? You think about when our parents used to go to the doctor's office, right? Ages ago. Like, my mom is 84, just turned 84. Shout out to my mom on her birthday on October 4th. She turned 84. So let's just say about, 60 years ago, she would go to the doctor's office. They'd ask her what's wrong. She would tell them what's wrong. They would treat the symptom and she'd go about her business. When I go to my doctor's office, I don't know if anybody else, give me a thumbs up in the chat if you've experienced this, they give you a clipboard. Before they'd even sit down and have a conversation with you, they're like, here's a clipboard. And you go through the clipboard and they're like, tell me about your family history. We want to understand, do you have history of blood pressure, like stroke, breast, like they want to know the things. And why? Because they can't treat you until they really understand your history, right? And so if you think about that and what they impose on Black people when they put us, we're not historians. We haven't been, most of us are youngins, or at least we look young. I know I'm 50, but I look like I'm 38. So I haven't been around for as long as your company's been around. And you're asking me to come and talk topically. You understand? And so really and truly, what we need to do is you need to go and have the conversations to say, we're old, we're about 80 years old. Where were Black people in our organization 80 years ago? Oh, they were the butlers and the slaves, and they were well, what if all of your systems have that embedded in them? And now we're just in 2022, and they just look different. They're slaves in a suit, sitting at the same table as you, but not holding the same power and position. And so I think for me, it was like, I started off, I got caught up in the flurry, then I became exhausted, then I realized, okay, no, I can't get exhausted because I got to do for other people. And then I said, what if I turn the tables and start really asking some deep questions to very intelligent people and get them to do the work?
So do you think the impact of slavery is still evident today?
Oh, 100%. It just looks different. I'll give you a couple examples, right? Personal examples. So there's this space I'm going to just say I worked in. I won't say the time frame in which I worked in it. And questions would come up at like our all hands call, and they say, hey, what are you doing about hiring for diversity? And no word of a lie, I would say that if you looked at the people that were doing the work, pretty diverse. Like if you go to a call center, it's pretty diverse. So imagine this question being asked in the call center. What are you doing about diversity? I would tell you, if I was sitting there and I heard that question, I realized it was asked by a Black person. Okay. So they asked this question, and then the leaders, always leaders answering these all hand call questions. And they say, you know what? We think we hire for diversity. In fact, we invite everybody to please look around. Look around, you'll see diversity, and really interested to understand people's perspectives. So I had that kind of situation. I said, hey, I'm a senior exec. I'd love to answer that. I'd love to give you a perspective. And I would met with them, this person, these two leaders, and I said, when you tell me, because remember, I'm on that call, you're the one answering the questions, and you tell me, Nkechi, look around. I don't see anyone at my level that looks like me. And when I look up, I don't see anyone that looks like me at all. So what you're essentially saying from your perch is look down and look around, and you'll see diversity. What I need you to do is look around. And so for me, I call that's a slavery of sort, because that is the slave master saying, but there's a whole bunch of you toiling the soil. Like, what's your problem? Your brethren and sistrens are all around you. Like, shout outs, like, so that's an example. Like anywhere where you can go and you see the hierarchy, and the base of the hierarchy has our brothers and sisters. Yet when we look up, we see no one look like me. I call that a plantation. I'm sorry. I'm just going to call it what it is. It's a plantation. So I say slavery exists in those type of environments. And I think it's incumbent on us, right? Like we also have control there. So I'm not going to put this all on the white man. We have some control. I think that we limit ourselves, and we're not having high mental conversations in our head. Yeah. And because we're not going to we only flock to the call center because we think that that's where we belong. But if more of us bum rush the door, we would I promise you, and walk with that level of Godfidence. I'm going to call it Godfidence, because for some reason or other, they don't believe, but God did. So Godfidence, yeah. If there's a level of Godfidence that we walk for, I think we can push it. And beyond that, I mean, there's just any type of form of, we see it all. I mean, we see it in the movies. We see how we're still struggling, and you walk into places and you just don't see color. You know what I mean? You don't see Black people. I'm not gonna say people of color, but you don't see color. There's a form of slavery there. We see it in the police force. We see it with the way people are treated, in wrongfully. We saw it with COVID, with the horrible, I can't even remember what it was, when they were holding all of those people that came back, I think, want to say from Nigeria, held their passports, like treated them like they weren't humans. Like, yeah. So we see it in a lot of spaces.
We see it everywhere. Can
See it
you
everywhere, yeah.
chip in on this?
But here is the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is why I do a lot of work on mindset. People think it's a joke that I wake up every single morning and I actually think life is amazing, because it takes mental work. And the one thing that they can't rob you, they can't, it's in your head. They can't rob your mind. And that's where we need to show up differently for ourselves.
You know, years ago, I watched Oprah Winfrey's show, and I believe it was somebody that was suffering from anorexia, and everybody was saying to her, oh, you need to eat, you need to do this, you need to do that. And then quietly she said, but how? So yes, you're saying the mind, your mind, you can control your mind. Kadum, David, I want you guys to jump in here. How can we begin to cultivate that habit of training our mindset, reminding of ourselves who we are, of building up the confidence, especially when you've been pushed down so many times?
Yeah, so sometimes for me, I look at my LinkedIn, I go back to that and I'm like, yo, I did all of this, I'm good. I've done amazing things. And when I look at the time frame in which I accomplished that, and also to know that fell into a plan that I designed for myself, some goals that I set for myself years ago, So I said, I built a roadmap for myself. So I go back to that so many times, just double check, like I did those things and I surpassed them as well. Then I also say it's how you speak to yourself and about yourself. I remember once someone told me, don't introduce myself when I go to networking events as an aspiring producer. Introduce myself as a producer. I am a producer. And just using that, what that does for my confidence in the room and how people engage with me, that shifts as well. So it's how we speak about ourselves. And for me, I truly know that I am a child of God, and I know that I am covered. I know that I have people praying for me. I have all that. I have the legacy of my grandmothers, my family, and so on that I'm carrying along with myself. So that's what I arm myself with daily. It's thinking about who is surrounding me, who do I have surrounding me, who's lifting me up. And also think about how I speak to and about myself. And that's very important too, for us to really release some of that defeatist language for ourselves. And I remember years ago, I told somebody, I'm like, I'm going to be an executive in the film and TV industry. And she's like, no, you're setting up yourself for failure there. You're not going to achieve that. And I did it, so I'm like, there are going to be people who are going to speak against your dreams for yourself, but you have to hold on to that. And not only, I didn't just say that I'm going to be those things, but I put in the work as well. So I think that's part of it. I just knowing who you have around me. I have my mainstays, my group chats, people who are on speed dial. I'm in WhatsApp. I'm talking to them. When I get into those moments, you have those people who could feed into you and who could remind you of who you are when you can't see it, when you're clouded by so much. Like, that's what we need to talk about as well. Is like, who do we have in our orbit? And it's very important that sometimes when you look and you see like, and I don't think that you may see it beforehand, but when maybe a particular person or situation may exit your life and you see things improve for yourself, you're like, oh, I was hanging on to things that I had no business hanging on to. I had people around me who I had no business having around me. So I think that's part of the work that we need to do. And also I would say is just a lot of self-awareness, getting to know yourself. Sometimes sitting in silence with yourself and being like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I to myself? Who am I to the people who are closest to me, who are further than me? Who am I to my community? That for us to take the time in doing that work, because I think that when you are so firm on who you are and what your values are, nobody could shake you, and it makes your decision making easier when you know that these things are your values, nobody could really move you so easily. So I think a lot of that work in terms of that self-awareness piece, you know, and I know who I am. I know who I am a child of, you know, and I walk into those rooms with that as well, you know. And I think that for some of us, we've been shamed out of that level of confidence. And sometimes it's seen as arrogant, as something negative. But I am who I am, you know. I've done amazing things in my life, you know. I'm loved, you know, and I love so many people. So I think just knowing that there's nothing wrong, with that, you know, that's what's anchoring you. So I think that's a big part. So that's usually what I tell people is get to know yourself.
Get to know yourself.
And I would say, like, I just knowing that, and just when people speak about you, when they say something, so you could be like, no, you could remind yourself each time, you know. And I think that's when it can just, it's really the people around you too. So just do that work, and you'll see yourself flourish.
Absolutely. Keep reminding yourself of who you are. Interested in.
And also just have a playlist. Like I have a soca playlist. I have an old school dancehall playlist when I need it. Also, I have my Beyonce tracks that I listen to when I know that I need an extra boost going out. I'll play Homecoming, the entire live album. I'll play that. But we need to arm ourselves with those things. These are all of this is our armor, you know. We need to do that and put that on, and that's what I do, you know.
Thank you for sharing those tips. You know, most of us, though, has been taught that when you validate yourself and praise yourself, that you are being boastful, you need to be humble. What I'm hearing you say is, we're not saying not be humble, but hey, go ahead, affirm yourself, validate yourself, remind yourself of who you are. For me, I write a list. Sometimes I remember, I think it was in February, I took a stock of all that I achieved in just that month. And even myself, I was so surprised that I did all of this in 1 month. I see David itching to jump in. David, go ahead.
Just going back to the question of how to build up your confidence and how to like arm yourself. I think one of the, first of all, Kadon, I loved what you said in regards of looking back at your own accomplishments and what you said, Mom, in terms of look at the things that you've achieved and taking pride in that. But for anybody who is young or anybody who feels like they haven't, you know, maybe made those accomplishments in their life and having struggles with that, I think one of the biggest, let me step back for a little bit. For those who don't know, I'm an artist, and when I draw, I can make a beautiful picture and not have to show anybody because I took pride in what I was able to create, and I'm able to take pride in that. So the reason why I bring that up is because my advice to people in terms of building up your confidence is actively engage in activities that you can take pride in, actively engage in things that can boost your confidence. It can be as small as making your bed every day, being consistent with that, to going to the gym and getting your body and your mind how you want to, or picking up a new hobby, because no matter what your age, you're not old enough to learn something new. If it's art, if it's music, or if you want to take out the Kadon and get into film, actively engage in those things that you feel like that you can take pride in. And you don't have to show anybody, it doesn't have to be for the outside, but the fact that you were able to accomplish something and you were able to create something, just helps you build up that confidence and helps you build up your self-esteem.
Completely, David. But you know what? I'm going to come back to you with this last question before we go into the Q&A, because I think we have some questions there. So as a young leader, David, as an artist, as a business person, what do you think, all of us here, what do we need to do to ensure, and I'm talk to not just me, talk to Blacks, Indigenous, person of color, talk to white, everybody, every one of us. What can we do to ensure we cut down this cycle of pain and suffering and trauma?
That's a good question. I like that question. I think it's, I mentioned this a little bit before, because it's really hard because you do want to protect your kids. But I think it's important that in a weird way, you have to kind of step back and let them live a little and let them experience things for themselves. And of course, there was an extent to that you can't, you shouldn't, you protect your kids or warn them when something bad happen to them, for sure do it. But it becomes a point where it's almost overbearing and it becomes almost overwhelming. There's things that you need to kind of keep in mind. And I think you, Mom, and my dad as well did a really good job at this when I was growing up. I don't know, I'm assuming it was consciously, but not too much emphasis of race was made when I was growing up. I was never really taught the you versus me mentality. I never really had to talk until I was much older. And I live in a predominantly white neighborhood, so I was able to go out and make those experiences and make those connections. So when that information did come to me when I was old enough and ready, I was able to be more conscious and not let it invade my subconscious mind, if that makes any sense. I would try to rephrase that. Because when you teach your kids or overwhelm them with too young of information about racism and all this trauma, they may grow up subconsciously carrying these biases and carrying these traumas, and it may hinder them, it may make them nervous, may make them timid. But if you let them experience life and then give it to them at an age where they are ready in their life, they'll be able to use that information more consciously, to not be timid, but to be aware of the threats and dangers they may interact with them, that may come to them. So just to conclude, I would say learn to step back, let your kids live a little, and just give them the information, what is relevant when you feel like they are ready. Don't overwhelm them at too young.
I'd like to, can I just add something to support that?
Absolutely.
I'm the product of my brother and I are the product of kids whose parents did not talk to them about racism, to the point where I'm like, do my parents know? Like, do they just think that they didn't they didn't have to like deal with it? So so a little bit of context. My parents came from Nigeria. They immigrated back here in 1960. My dad's intention, like it was very intentional. He came here to get an education so that he can go back to Nigeria and help build the telecom infrastructure. The reason he didn't go was because at that time, the Biafra War, so he didn't want to go back and have to be sent to the north. And so he stayed here, and my mom and my dad, my parents then had my brother and I. And as we grew old, as my dad was very, he was an electrical engineer. He had a job at Bell Canada at the time. Really great job. He was we were well off. We moved into an affluent white neighborhood, all white. We were the only speckles of Black. This was 1978. It was Montreal. And my parents moved us in there. And anyone will tell you, huh? So like racism, when I say that people like people would ring the doorbell, throw eggs at us. My dad had a white car, they wrote nigger on it. Like every white door that we had, they'd paint like swastika signs, but still they would just paint over, they never changed the phone number. We'd call the same cops whose kids were the ones that were causing the vandalism. My brother and I would get ridiculed, bullied on the way to school. They got us a driver. And as I got older and I would come home with some nonsense, right? I'd come home this one time, and I'll prove my point with this story. And I came home one day crying, Mommy, Mom, I said, Mark Della Riva, this kid, because his parents were like, Peter Della Riva played on the Montreal Alouettes, the football, so all the hockey kids were in my school and all this and the other. So affluent kids, I came home and I was like, Mommy, Mark Della Riva was like, who said his grandfather owns grandma. That's how I said it, right? And all the kids laughed at me. She says, huh, Nkechi? I don't know. Were you not in the village? Did you see any white man in the village? There's no white man in the village. You must go back to school and tell them there's no white man in the village. So I would go back to school armed with that information and truth that there's no white man in the village because I was there. I didn't see your grandfather, so it's not possible. And then the kids would look at that individual, that kid, school kid, and then wonder, so why are you saying that, right? And so I realized all of this to say that the only things our parents really need to arm us with, in my opinion, they need to stop parenting and they need to arm us with the truth. That's it. It's always about the truth. I went back in my truth. I had been to Nigeria. I'd been to Arochukwu. I'd been to the village. I'd seen there. And so I should have been able to speak my truth in the language. And a lot of times what we share is the trauma, not the truth. And so if we can really start to honor the truth as parents and not feel ashamed or, and give our kids the language that they need, I think they thrive very differently.
Kadum, do you want to add to it before I ask the three questions that we have?
And I would say to that, like, when my son was entering grade 3, around that time, around the end of grade 2, we moved into like a predominantly white neighborhood. And I knew that he was going to go into a school where he wouldn't be represented. And for real, for a couple years, he was the only like Black child, meaning with 2 Black parents, in grade 5 and lower in his school. And I really worried about that with him. And I remember one day he came home and he said, he was just like, I'm the only person, and he pointed at his skin like this in the school. And that was it. And all I asked him, just like, how does that make you feel? And he was just like, He was just like, okay. And then he went on with the rest of his evening. And I think that's one of the key things I've learned with parenting, is to take my cue from him. And I would always ask, if he tells me about something that happened, I'll say, well, how does it make you feel? What do you think about that? And then he could have the conversation with me, and we could take it from there. But that also lets him build a vocabulary around it. It also gives him some agency in that as well, and him being able to navigate that, and where he doesn't feel othered in his school. I went to a predominantly white elementary school, and there were rare incidents when I felt othered in that space. I can remember just one. I remember there was a time, there was a new student in the school. She was from St. Vincent, and everybody thought that we were going to be friends. And I'm like, but why? She's older than me. So what do we actually have in common? And I was able to call it out as a child. Like, that doesn't make any sense. She's 2 grades above, why would you automatically think that? Just calling attention to that person's bias and to their thinking as well. But that's also because I had a family that, we were very open in terms of speaking about things like that. So I think as parents, we need to create a safe environment for our children. And that's what we do. And in some cases, it is really hard to avoid the violence of racism, because sometimes it's really in your face because of the neighborhood, the community that you're in. But there are times when we really just let our children lead, and we also have to be mindful of what we share with them and how much we expose them to. And also, I love what you said there in terms of like knowing when it's our trauma that's responding. And that's where that self-awareness comes into it too. But and I realized that with my son, my worry about him being in that school, that was my thing that I was carrying. That was me also projecting that fear onto him as well, and he's had a different experience there. So I think part of parenting is learning when not to share, when to share, when be very careful. Yeah, go ahead, David. Go ahead and add.
Sorry,
David, you know what I'm going to do? David, give me a second. I'm going to also ask you a question. There is a question here for you, so you can address it at the same time.
Okay.
So this question is for you. Say, did you ever experience racism in high school or university, and were you able to deal with it on your own or with the help of someone?
Okay, so I can answer both of these at the same time. One, I wanted to add on to what Kadon said, because there were 2 things you mentioned, which made me smile, because I had such a similar experience, which I almost found it funny. You talked about how your kid at school was the only person like this, and pointed to his skin. And when you asked him how he felt about it, he kind of shrugged it off. In my own elementary school, there were only 4 Black kids: me, my older brother, and my 2 younger brothers. So but funny enough, I remember being in elementary school, and I liked it. I felt special. I felt different. So I feel like if I had all that trauma dumped in me when I was younger, I would have looked at it different. But at a young age, I was able to kind of feel confident in the fact that I stood out from the crowd. So I think that just kind of touches on the importance of being careful with how much you tell your kids too early. And the second thing you told me, which you said somebody from St. Vincent came in and they immediately thought you two were going to be friends. I remember this is in my later years of my elementary school, grade 7 and grade 8, we had this other Nigerian family move in. I'm we're Nigerian itself, if you did not know. So another Nigerian came in, and there was a girl who was in my grade, and everybody thought we were going to date. And she was a nice girl, but we hardly ever spoke up until that point. So it was funny to see how people put us into groups before I even had the acknowledgement of it myself. So I just thought that was super kind of coincidental that how we have similar experience in that regard. And to answer the question of have I ever experienced any racism in high school and university? My university experience is kind of weird because of COVID, so a lot of it was virtual. So thankfully, I haven't really experienced much in university, but in high school, I have experienced quite a bit of racism from teachers to students. And I don't want to go too much into the exact details because one, I kind of wanted to talk about the second part of the question about how I kind of overcame it, but also because my experiences in my high school, they were so outlandish that it makes me question it myself, that I'm like, I can't believe that happened. And to give a little preview into the second part of the question, my answer to it, how did I deal with it? At the time, I didn't. I was very quiet. I was very timid. I let those experience shaking up my confidence, and I kind of stayed quiet when it was happening. And just kind of give a little taste of it. I would say 2 instances that happened. There was this one kid, grade 10. His name was, I'm not gonna say his last name, but his first name was also David. He said the N-word to me repeatedly. He called me it, and he just generally said it with the intention to egg me on, just get me to react physically or verbally. He wanted to see me get angry. And I remember it so clearly because and when he would say it, he'd be like, and other people would tell him to stop, so not everybody's bad. He would reply as like, what is it? You're not gonna do anything. Saying, because I'm not gonna fight him. I'm not, at the time, I wasn't witty enough to come up with a comeback or reply or anything like that. And so I just was quiet and I let it carry on. And the only reason why it stopped is because he moved schools, which is unfortunate that I allowed myself to endure it for so long. And then the second instance, I want to bring up the second one because it also involves a teacher. There was a kid in my school and he would make monkey noises to me repeatedly, like an ape. I was make jokes like, "Do you want a banana?" Things like that. And again, I did nothing. And this story is funny because the teacher was a witness of this. She saw it without a shadow of a doubt, but she never said anything. And if she did, it was a very general of, "Hey guys, pipe down, guys, be quiet," more addressing the fact that we're talking in class rather than the blatant racism that's happening right in front of her. So both those experiences, they both did shaking up my confidence a lot. It was funny because like I spoke on my experience in elementary school, I was very confident and very kind of flamboyant kid, and that kind of disappeared in high school. But if you wanted to ask how I overcome it now, I now have a little bit more of, now that this is kind of a burden as well as strength, but when you're Black, just a Black man, Black woman, you have to be educated. You have to know the truth, like we were saying before. So when those instances come up, you're able to not only defend yourself articulately, but have the confidence to just ignore it and just brush it off because you know your truth and you know how the situation is. So that is kind of how I defended myself, is because I became educated in like the small instances and stories of racism and things like that. And I just kind of took a wider look a wider look of how like race relations kind of became how it is today. So it allowed me to become a little bit more sure of myself when those instances would happen. I hope that answers the question. It was really a long response.
Thank you for sharing, David, and being very candid at that. A couple of comments from that we have in the Q&A. Somebody says, in order for us to teach the next generation without the transmission of trauma, our generation would need the trauma healing. Absolutely, that's why we're doing this session. So we can transmit the wisdom without also transmitting the trauma. And trust me, for example, I'm learning. In the beginning, I will cry, but now I'm thinking I do better. I hope, David Chima. Another comment says, I love your grounded and proud energy and stance. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Queer person from Turkey. Woo, we have somebody from Turkey. Hi, thank you so much. We really appreciate your comment and you joining us. Somebody say, how do you keep your personal confidence, self-belief strong in a workplace where you don't have power in the organization, and whether you are successful or not is decided by people higher up than you, particularly when there are no Blacks or people of color in any management or executive role? I'm gonna let Nkechi answer that.
Sorry, can you like the key part of the question is?
This person wants to know how you keep your confidence and how you keep your self-belief, especially when you don't have anybody that looks like you in a position of power.
So, I'm going to say a couple of things. One, we won't have much time to go into this, but I just want to submit everybody for consideration. We've talked a lot about pain and trauma, okay? And I don't say this lightly, but I would say that there's a lot of material online in terms of how to do it. I think the best way to get through that is to turn it to purpose. Don't waste a hurt. And I say this lovingly, but I also say, because it's like, we have to unlock different steps that we take in life. Like we've been like a lot of times we have these same panels and we're still talking about the same themes of conversation. Yet I just feel like there's so much within our own personal control. With 7.5 billion people on this planet, we do not have the monopoly of pain and trauma. We just don't. Right. And so when you can use, if we don't have it, then that means it could be used. It could be fuel in a really positive and empowering way. And I encourage everybody to really start to focus on that more so. How can you use this and not waste it? So that's one. Two, to really answer your question, I say this respectfully because this is my truth. I will leave you to figure out what to do with it. I am human first before I'm Black. God made me human. He made me human. He creates humans. And then he decides who he needs and where he needs them and how he's going to use them. But first and foremost, he creates human. Okay. And so, and when I think of myself first as a human. So to answer that question, how do I sit at a table? Because I sit at the table as a human with like humans that bleed blood like me. And then I just happen to be brilliant, fabulous, and talented. And then add that I will bring my swag and my style anywhere I go. And that's not confidence, that's courage. To me, courage trumps confidence any single day. Confidence comes from competence.
Yeah.
And so all you need to do is just attack life with bravery and courage. It's really about that. What if I keep saying to myself, what if I try? What if I say something? What if I just choose not to conform? What if I shave half my head, an executive at a bank in technology? And I'm an executive and it's red, right? And like, what if I do that? Well, guess what? I get to run the world. That's what happens when you actually choose to realize this person, this blessing, this human that you have complete control over. is here to gift your experiences. I'm telling you, you got to start to think about that every single day. I love what Kidan said. Yes. Yeah. You have to over-index on what you're telling yourself. Let's not get it twisted. I intentionally wore pink today.
Mhm.
Why? Because I knew that no one else would. I just felt it, right? I do things that will make me stand out. Those two images behind me, don't think of them. That's not just art on the wall. Those are there intentionally because each of them carry meaning. And I knew that if I'm going to sit at home and work every single day and I'm on camera, I need something that is behind me, that is giving me that courage to propel. And just the image of them gives me strength. That vision board, everything on that board is manifesting. Why? Because I see it, I look at it every single day. If you look at my vision wall, I have Mamba mentality. I am amazing. I am focused. I'm indistractable. I am light on my feet. I am healthy. I am a force to reckon. I am a money magnet. I'm amassing great fun. Like I have so much signs. Where's this one? Hold on. I have a sign that says, I want your day to be better simply because I was here. We need to over-index on all of the years of that mental slavery that's been bestowed on our ancestors, and somehow it started to creep into our DNA. And so the only way to do it is to counter it with signs and messages and positivity. The other day, just sidebar, I had a party. I turned 50. I know. I'm gonna be fly to the day I die. I know. 38, I'd say I'm 38. I'm 38 plus tax, right? Well, my dad would say that's not the right math. It's really $43.50 plus tax. But that just doesn't sound as sexy. So 38 plus tax is what I'm going with. And I invited over 142 people. And about 142 people showed up, and not everyone knew each other. And my husband's Jamaican, so you had Jamaicans over here, you had Nigel over there, you had some white people over there that came from Montreal, and all this and the other, a whole bunch of people. And the photo booth guy posted on Instagram that he went to a 50th birthday party this past weekend, and what he was so amazed at was the level of community and collaborate and fun and high vibes until he met the birthday girl, because he realized that the nucleus of all of that vibe was some human that creates that environment. And so you have to recognize that as a human being. He didn't say Black woman, he didn't even say woman, he just said this human. I'm the bridge. I brought all those people together. And so that's the power that we all have to create the environment and the life that we want. We just have to believe it.
And it's amazing. And if you're feeling it, please type in name in the chat right now, because I'm definitely feeling it. I'm really feeling it. I have another question that I want us to get to. Somebody said, I did like to ask, what are your coping mechanisms and techniques to hate? I'm asking this from another community, but I really appreciate how you gain your deserved self-value.
Can I touch on that?
Please do.
I think the answer, Nakeshi already kind of talked about it, and I loved her response because realistically, it's very simple. That we've talked about trauma and everything like that, and how hate and all these negative words can negatively impact you. So we acknowledge that negative words can make you feel negative. Why don't we think positive words that we give to ourselves can make us feel positive? It is really that simple. So you fully have to fulfill yourself with that positive affirmation, she said, in any type of way possible. And I spoke on this earlier on the session that you had to intentionally engage in things that you can be confident in. It's all about that. It's all about reaffirming to yourself that you are somebody of worth and you are like someone worthy, and putting aside the personal confidence aside, and how do you deal with it in the day-to-day interaction. You don't need to entertain hate. You don't need to entertain anything to your life that doesn't bring you value. So
I love that.
I'll just leave it at that. All you need to do is step away and have truth in yourself and who you are. And I love what you said. I love all the positive affirmation you have in the room. I smiled when I heard the Mamba mentality. All of that is great. And I just say more of that.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say something to that person that asked that question? There's a great book. It's called A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. Okay. And the other thing I'm going to suggest too is Bishop Michael Curry. I don't know who listened to the royal wedding, Meghan and Harry, when they got married, but Bishop Michael Curry, Black bishop, took the world to church with a sermon on love, 13 minutes. I dare everyone to go to YouTube, Google it. I reached out to him. I called his church. I told him I'm a love minion. The book, A Return to Love, is a very powerful book, and it changed my life because the book talks about love, hate. It tells us that babies are born into love. So think about that. Babies are born into love. Every one of us were born into love. We learned hate. And if we learn something, you can unlearn it also. What happens if you started to ride a bike when you were a kid and you just stopped riding a bike until like you became an adult? Sometimes when you try to get back on it, it's like you're not feeling really, really good. It's no different because you are actually unlearning the act of riding a bike. Hate is the exact same thing. I don't see hate. I see opportunity to have a conversation, right? I see love and I move from a place of love and I tend to attract it more. And I think every situation, I will be honest with you, I attack everything. Love is my armor and peace is my weapon, right? And so if it's really about recognizing that we can dismantle hate. We actually can.
I love it. And if you don't mind, Nkechi, can you put the name of the book in the chat so that people can see?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And if we're not able to get to your question today, don't be discouraged. Our great panelists here, they've agreed to help answer any one of these questions that we didn't address. I think for the most part, we covered all the questions here. Most others are pretty much like comments. But if we go through it afterwards, and if we mix any of these questions, we will be sending it to our panelists here to help us address. And yes, if you do have questions after the session, you walk away, you're still thinking about this, do send us your.
Can I just ask a question? Like, I know you said they can send it to us and all this. Well, before you send me a question, I have a question on behalf of David and Kenan and Evangeline to everyone that's there and that's in the chat. I just want to know, what is one thing that you're going to do differently the minute you step off the Zoom? Just one thing. Because if you're not leaving here with and I don't want to assign a call to action to you. I know I said read the book. I know I did this, and Kenan and David all provided tangible tips, but it has to come from you. What are you willing to commit yourself to do after spending 2 hours on this platform or an hour and a half? That's a lot of human time. We can't give that back to you, yet we presented you with a lot of gifts today. So I would implore everyone, until you write it down, it's not happening. So what is one thing that you're willing to commit to change, so that when Evangeline brings up the inaugural event, the conversation we have to move these conversations forward. Let's talk about the next step. We can't continuously talk about these same things. Otherwise we're not progressing. More self-care. I love it. It's a brave space right now. You got to put something. If you love yourself, put something in that chat.
Absolutely. Let us know how you're feeling. Let us know how you're going to help change the world. Let us know how you're going to make your workplace more inclusive, safe for you and your children. Let us know how you're going to teach your children different, right? Let us know what you've learned. It is important that we know that you get it, because it also impacts how we provide you these services. And we do have a survey. You can see the link. Please fill it. Let us know again how we can continue to improve these services and programs that we bring to you. Honestly, I really believe for me, I learned a lot. Every time that we do one of these sessions, I walk away more empowered, more ready to tackle the world, basically. So I am so honored, and I thank all of you panelists. You covered a lot. You talked about how we can achieve enduring healing. You gave us so many strategies and ways that we can navigate the challenges that we see every day in our life, in the workplace, so that we can continue to stay on the path of recovery. You awesome panelists tackled best ways to avoid, going down that pen line and passing our trauma to the younger generation. And last but not the least, you provided great insights. Kechi talked about positive mindsets during challenging time and, validation. What can I say? Thank you, panelists. By sharing your stories, your experiences, and your insights, I know you have ignited light where there is darkness. On a personal note, I remember one time that I lost my job, I faced two options. One was to wallow in self-pity. The other one was to take action. And I chose to do the latter. The next day when I took my kids to basketball, my twins, as I was watching them, I asked myself this question: what type of world do I want to leave for my boys? A world filled with stories of disappointment, or one with courage and survival? And I chose to take courage, to be bold, to step up, and to do something different in my life. So I will leave all of you here today with this quote from Oprah: forgive yourself, forgive them. Step out of your history and into the path of your future. Before we go, I want to remind you that we have a collective resilience celebration coming on October the 29th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Please check our website and social media pages for details and reserve your free ticket. Let's, like Nkechi said, let's come together. There's going to be different backgrounds, people from different backgrounds. There's whites, there's Indian, there is different parts of African countries, Caribbeans, you name it, that's going to be part of this celebration. And I believe when we come together as a collective, we heal together. So don't forget, look out on our social media pages and for more information. And yes, please donate to support our work. This is how we continue to provide you with these services free of charge. Until next time, I am your moderator, Evangeline Chima. Stay safe, be well, and thank you. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening, everybody.